Joining us this morning is Santana Simiyu from the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya chapter. Good morning, Santana.
Good morning, Eric.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Welcome to the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
Make yourself comfortable, relax, sit back, relax, enjoy this journey. It's going to be just a very smooth ride, just a couple of air pockets as we approach landing. But until then, we'll be fine. Okay?
Noted.
We are having a justice conversation today. Every Thursday, we strive to have a justice conversation looking at various facets of justice and access to justice. Today, we want to talk about access to justice for persons living with mental disability. Now, this is a big one. Persons living with mental disability and how they get to access justice or how they are treated by the justice system is a big issue. And I know that you'll be telling us what ICJ Kenya has been doing in terms of looking into this issue and what you'd like to see done. But I think let's start with just definitions, okay? There are people who may be hearing about ICJ Kenya for the first time today. We've had several people from ICJ Kenya joining us. But just for purposes of introduction, what's ICJ Kenya?
ICJ Kenya is a non-governmental, non-profit, and member-based organization that was founded in 1959. The mission of the organization is human rights. We promote human rights, democratic governance, justice, and the rule of law. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who are the members?
Lawyers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, as long as the person is a lawyer, you can apply for membership.
So you and the lawyer is somebody who's been admitted to the bar or just somebody who's gone to law
Even
school?
those in university
Okay.
can apply to be members.
People
There's
in the
also
legal
members from the
profession.
bench. These are judges and magistrates.
So anybody aspiring to be a lawyer can't be a member.
While in campus, you can join.
When it's just in your thought process, you are
Not yet.
contemplating.
If
No,
you
you
visit,
can't.
if you visit the Nairobi School of Law, and you have a few conversations, how do I join? How do I?
Yes.
You've already started the journey.
Or you pass
can
by a
apply.
police station every once in a while, chat to the person at the desk. Yeah,
No, when you start your program, you can apply.
And when you work for a lawyer,
No. It doesn't suffice.
okay. So your mission is to promote human rights and justice.
Yes.
So let's talk about this one of persons with mental disability. First of all, how do we define mental disability? I mean, how do we know who we are talking about?
Mental disability can either be intellectual or so intellectual are the ones who are born with it. That's whereby they have a condition that affects how they operate. So they have a psychological impairment, but that's from so an intellectual disability is when it's from birth.
Okay.
So a mental disability is one that comes later. Even something like depression is a mental illness. So mental disability usually come later. Intellectual disabilities are the ones that people are born with.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're talking about both cases.
Yeah, both
Both
cases.
intellectual and mental disability.
Yeah.
And does it have to be certified by a medical profession that you are living or you have a mental disability?
Yes, it has
Or
to.
can you insulting someone
No.
suffice?
You have to be diagnosed with
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, if we could just, go straight to it. So, some of the things that we're talking about, the intellectual disabilities we're speaking of, things like autism,
Yes.
cerebral palsy, things like this,
Yes.
that then would say you will not be able to function as normal, whatever normal could be these days. I mean, you can go across threshold.
Yeah.
But what is then deemed to be normal? Some of those disabilities, that's what we're talking about now. So the things that come later, when you talk then about mental disabilities, are the things then can be brought about by lifestyle,
Yes.
the depression that we're
Yeah.
talking about, alcohol, drug abuse,
Yes.
and things like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So some could argue that later on these mental disabilities or incapacity come about as a result of choices that are made, whereby the intellectual disabilities you had no hand in at
Yes,
all. Is
yes.
that the case?
Yes, that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah. The mental disabilities come later in life. It can be as a result of your lifestyle, but also it can be external factors.
Right.
For example, like depression, it's due to your, your socio-economic situation. So it's not per se by your own fault.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
So when you talk about now people with mental disability and how they access justice, what are the challenges that they go through?
The first challenge that they go through is the limitation in their legal capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So legal capacity is the ability for a person to exercise their rights and obligations as provided in the law. And everybody's supposed to have legal capacity, but persons with mental disability have challenges in exercising their legal capacity because of the discriminatory attitudes in society against them. So it's believed that they can't make decisions in matters that affect them. And this can be seen in the current Mental Health Act, 1989, the one that they are seeking to amend. There's a provision that provides for guardianship orders. This is whereby the court makes an order that another person can manage the property of a person with a mental disability. And this goes against the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities because it provides that states should refrain from denying persons with with any sort of disability their legal capacity. Instead, it provides for supported decision making. This is whereby they have a person who respects their wills and preferences and helps them to communicate to third parties. And in turn, also, this person explains to the person with a mental disability the choices that they have at hand. But what the Act currently provides for is called substituted decision making. This is whereby you get into the shoes of the person with a mental disability and make decisions for them. So you disregard their decisions.
Without necessarily consulting them.
Yes.
So the judicial officer is not required to confirm that you've actually consulted with the person
Yes.
with the mental disability.
Yes. So there's a case of Wilson Morara whereby Justice Majanja said that persons with mental disabilities are viewed like objects of social protection rather than subjects of the law who have rights and obligations like the rest of
Like
us.
everybody else.
Yeah. So that's the first challenge, limitation in legal capacity. And if your legal capacity is limited, then how do you exercise your rights? So even in court, when you appear, the first thing you're supposed to show is your sanity. Even when you, in the court documents, let's say an affidavit, you swear that you have sound mind. So once the magistrate or judge just notices that you have that impairment, the hearing is usually postponed. But I'll move to the next point and explain that further. The legal technicalities. There's a lot of legal technicalities as provided by the Criminal Procedure Act. The Criminal Procedure Act provides that once the judicial officers notice that you have some sort of psychological impairment, they usually postpone the hearing. If it's an offense whereby you can be given bail, you'll be released on bail, but with sufficient security. But if it's an offense that you can't be given bail, this is mostly the capital offenses such as murder, robbery, violence. So in such a case, the judicial officer will determine where you'll be detained, and most of the time it's in prison. And then they write a report to the president. This is what is provided in the Criminal Procedure Code. They write a report to the president, and the president is supposed to make a decision on where you'll be detained, whether it's in prison or in a mental health facility. So once they make that decision, the judicial officer will give orders for warrant. If you had been released, you'll be arrested. And so you'll be detained either in prison or in a mental health facility. And you'll stay there until when the president makes a decision on that matter, or if the court summons you again. Or there are cases where the head medical officer in that institution, whether it's prison or the healthcare facility, they write a report to the ODPP that you've improved, your condition has improved, and you're capable of making a defense. So once that report is written to the ODPP goes to court. And when it goes to court, so he's supposed to tell the court whether this person should be released or whether the case should resume. But he can only be released if it's in the public interest. Let's say if it's someone who's committed murder, that's not in the public interest. So if they resume and the ODPP proves that you were actually guilty in that matter, But then in the defense, it's shown that the person had a mental disability at the time of committing the crime. So the judge will have to will have to write a special finding whereby he states all this, and then it's sent to the president, and the president determines whether you stay in prison or in a mental facility. But once they make that decision, you stay there indefinitely, and this is called being detained at the pleasure of the president.
Okay. You mentioned a certain process that judicial officers carry out. Do you have any process, any procedure that enables judicial officers to be trained in matters of mental health so that they can reasonably determine that someone's state of mind is unsound or is in need of assistance?
So what usually happens currently is when the judicial officer has sufficient reason to believe that
Okay, explain this sufficient reason. What is it that comprises this sufficient reason?
he can see how a person is behaving, and so he'll make an order, she will make an order that the person goes for an assessment, and that's with a psychiatrist. But the process is flawed, like I was saying, because they'll go and they'll stay there for some time, and then they'll go back to court. And when they go back to court, they're treated as if they've come for the first time. They're appearing before it for the first time. And if, again, the judicial officer has some reason to believe that this person still can't make a defense, that process repeats.
It is actually extremely flawed. Because we are saying that the judicial officer is using their legal training and their experience to determine the mental state or the mental health state of an individual. Now, there are very many mental conditions that don't exhibit in any untoward way. There's nothing, they're not going to strip naked and start running around the court, you know. They're not going to shout at people. They behave, as we say, like normal people, and yet they are definitely not okay.
I mean, there are many, things like, bipolarism, for example. Unless they were in an extreme situation, you wouldn't see somebody acting different. However, the condition could make them do something that was really terrible. But having a normal conversation with somebody, unless you did the scientific investigation, you would not be able to know, or the behavioral investigation, you would not be able to know, and you can't tell that by merely looking at somebody.
Or case in point, let's say, for instance, you are a judicial officer and you've been evicted from your house. And if you're male, your wife has left you, and you come, just a scenario, and you come to work. You're not in the right state of mind.
At that moment, no.
Most definitely not.
Or if I have a panic
the magistrate
attack.
in this case.
You're the magistrate in this case.
Yeah.
Now, and here are issues being brought to you, and you are making decisions with that state of mind that you're in. The larger question I'm asking is, we are talking about people who go before the courts, and I'm asking the question of the people who determine these issues, who looks into their mental state? The people who collect the evidence, the police, who looks into their mental state? The people who prosecute, who looks into their mental state? Because all these things come together to determine whether this particular individual who's before the court is in the right frame of mind. What if the others who are making those decisions are the ones who are not in
They have
the
a
right?
mental illness.
Yeah, they're the ones who are not okay.
Yeah, currently there's no part of the law that provides for the judicial officers themselves or police to be assessed. However, we know particularly police suffer from mental health conditions because of the nature of their job. And these days they're coming out and saying that more and more. And I think the National Police Service has programs for their welfare now. Yeah.
So when someone, like you're saying, a judicial officer will just make an observation and get a sense that this person may be having a mental illness, what do? Do they then say that I'd like you to go for some psychiatric test?
Yeah.
Or do they just make the next decision based on their observation?
No, they make an order
Okay.
that the person should go for psychiatric test.
Okay.
Yes, so that's when they go and they go to the health facility, and it can even be a detention facility, whereby because there's still medical officers in the detention facilities,
Okay.
and then the medical officer will write a report to the prosecution. The prosecution then goes and presents in court, particularly right when they see this person is capable of making a defense.
Okay.
Yes.
So what we've seen previously until a certain precedent was set, I think last year, is that those who are facing capital offences, murder, criminal, armed robbery and such, robbery, violence, would automatically be first sent for a psychiatric tests.
Evaluation.
Yes.
And now the court said, well, you don't have to do this to somebody.
Yeah.
As long as they're here and they're willing to proceed with the case, we go ahead.
Yeah.
So does that also then have an effect on somebody who generally has a mental illness?
If someone has a mental illness, that they will have to go for an assessment. Because they will have to, even the nature of these illnesses are such that even the communication can be a problem. The communication with the court can be a problem. So that's when they're taken for an assessment. And actually the Constitution provides that people can have intermediaries when communicating with the court. And persons with mental disabilities need this. However, it doesn't happen. But they need these intermediaries because sometimes they say what they don't mean. They can even say they're guilty. They can even report themselves in a police station and say, I killed my grandfather. And the police, what will they do immediately is arrest them.
the person.
Yeah.
Sema ameconfess, so tuende kotini kesho asubuhi.
Yeah.
Process for court. But you see, there are some mental illnesses that are obvious. I mean, they'll manifest, and others will not.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, that's why I started by asking, how do we define mental illness?
Also, it can be in the defense. The defense, there's a particular case, it's called Republic versus Richard Kaitani, whereby he was sentenced to death. For murder in the past, they used to be hanged. But his saving grace was just an expert witness was called in court, and they proved that at the time of committing the murder, he was not in a proper state of mind. So that also happens. Expert witnesses are called, and it's mainly by the defense. They're the ones who bring it up.
Okay, so we've seen many cases. I mean, whether you're going to live in the world of movies or if you're going to live, in the world in which we live in, that then there are many folks who would use this mental illness defense as a way to get away from them having to face, a trial. What are the rights of this individual then who is in this position? Because you've said, until and unless the president decides on this matter, this person could remain in detention or remain in a mental facility for God knows how long, and waiting for and the trial is still waiting.
No,
if
that one,
or what happens in this case? What rights do they have?
So the detention at the pleasure of the president, usually if you've been found guilty,
Okay.
and it's proved that at the time of committing the crime you had a mental health condition,
Right.
You'll be detained at the pleasure of the president, and it can be either at a hospital or the prison.
Okay.
Indefinitely.
Yeah, indefinitely.
Okay.
Until now, the president decides that you can be released. But this was declared unconstitutional.
Right, because they could forget about you, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It was declared unconstitutional in a case whereby the accused person challenged this.
Yeah.
Because particularly, this takes away the discretion of the judiciary, because this is the president who has the discretionary powers when it's the judiciary who should be determining
How old
sentences.
was this law? This one where the president is the one who decides whether...
The Mental Health Act 1989, the one that is being repealed, it's very outdated. It had a lot of coercion, and it was not in tandem with the current constitution. Yeah.
Okay, so what rights then are they? What rights do they have? Whether it is before, because we've also seen that, somebody for whom charges have been, preferred will then say they need the mental health assessment. So let's say this individual then is found to be unfit mentally. What are their rights at that moment? They still remain a guest of the state, as it were, while they continue with this evaluation, whether they go on to treatment. What can they have? So what rights are theirs? How are they protected under the law?
What happens? First of all, they have fair trial rights, just like everyone.
Okay.
But one challenge that we're seeing is they're usually detained in prison, rather than they need to be detained in a mental health. They need to go to hospital. That's what they need.
Yes.
But they'll be detained in prison while the assessment goes on. And then that's when the medical officer keeps reporting to the prosecution, telling them the condition is improving, they can resume trial. But then the problem with this process is it can go around in circles, because it can go to court, and if they see it's still not fine, they send them to a psychiatrist again, and then you see it go, and then the psychiatrist now after some time tells the prosecution now they're fit to go for trial. So what happens in most cases, the prosecution can adduce evidence to show whether they're guilty or if they're not guilty.
Okay.
And then that's when, if it's proved that at the time of committing the offense, they had a mental condition, that's when now they're either detained in a hospital or the prison at the president's pleasure. But this has been declared unconstitutional.
Okay.
Let's take a break.
Okay.
It's coming up to 7:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Santana Simiyu from the ICJ Kenya is with us. This is the International Commission of Jurists Kenya chapter. We are having a Justice Thursdays conversation. Access to justice for persons with mental disability. ICJ Kenya has published an access to justice manual for persons with mental disabilities. Let's look at the contents of this particular manual next, and also to try to understand, so what are we trying to correct and how are we correcting it, and does this actually serve the purpose?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
In the room is Siti Muga Nduoko Eric Latif, and our guest today, Santana Simiyu, Program Officer at the International Commission of Jurists Kenya chapter. We are having a Justice Thursdays conversation, access to justice for persons with mental disability. So there's work that you've done at ICJ Kenya. Tell us about the work that you've done and now the manual that you've released.
We've developed a manual, which is an access to justice manual for persons with mental disability. This is how it looks. I believe the camera is that side.
Yes.
Yeah. So the manual contains a legislative framework relating to persons with mental disabilities. It contains the challenges that they face in the justice system. It contains also the symptoms of the different mental health conditions. However, it's not exhaustive, because I was advised that there are more than 300 by the psychiatrist that was one of the persons developing the manual. And there's also the referral mechanism and recommendations. So the reason we developed this is in order for duty bearers to be aware of the challenges that the persons with mental disabilities face in the justice system. Yes, and it has various recommendations to the different duty bearers. Yes.
What are the key recommendations?
So it's to different duty bearers. If I can begin with maybe the NCAJ.
Okay.
That's the National Council on Administrative Justice. This is here you find all the leaders in the justice system, and their mandate is mainly to ensure that there's a coordinated approach in administration of justice. So I think they can play a role in sensitizing the different justice stakeholders on the plight of persons with mental disabilities. And then also the judiciary. If we look at Section 55 of the Mental Health Act, it provides that the Chief Justice should develop regulations regarding the procedure in court when a person with mental health condition is involved. Then also Article 50 of the Constitution provides that you can have an intermediary in court. So there's also need for rules around that, how and when you should have an intermediary. And then also there's the Kenya Prison Service and the National Police Service, particularly the Kenya Prison Service. There's need for comprehensive healthcare within the prisons for these persons, and also for them to provide psychotherapy upon the request of such persons, and also for them to conduct regular checkups on these persons.
So prisons should actually have like some hospitals and clinics within them.
Yes.
But I thought they did.
They do, but I don't think the
They
checkups
have the
are...
expertise.
One thing also I've not mentioned is the total number of psychiatrists in Kenya are 125.
125.
Yes.
Full stop.
Yes.
Okay.
So there are very few, knowing that we have a population of 54.9, the last census, as of the last census. So you can see the ratio of psychiatrists vis-a-vis the population. So...
Okay, but then with their services are augmented by other mental health professionals, clinical psychologists, counselors, because not every mental condition requires the sort of intervention that only a psychiatrist can provide. But that's just an aside. What you're doing is not only noble and timely, but it's something that requires lauding. What I need to understand is there anything that you have set in motion to help people within, say, the prison services, the police service? You know I'm going with this one. Prosecutors, court officers.
So we just developed the manual and we launched it in May. However, we have had one sensitization forum with the Kibera Court Users Committee. And in the Court Users Committee, all the different stakeholders sit there. That is, whether it's the bench, prison officers.
All of them.
Yeah, so that's what we plan to do with this manual. And one thing that was coming out from that forum was that the prisoners and police need sensitization on this. Yeah, because also the police might, since at the point of arrest, they may not be able to communicate with this person.
Sure.
And these persons may not be saying what they mean. Yes, so actually also intermediaries should be used even in police stations. It might be ambitious, but it can, even a county can have one intermediary because, this is rare cases. They'll be used rarely.
Actually, it's not even one. You see, as I said, the health practitioners don't begin and end with psychiatrists. There are many other people who are trained in just fundamentally diagnosing and understanding these things. Okay? Now, beyond sensitization, as in you sit people in a place, you get them to understand, there's the everyday practice. Now, perhaps including within the services of the police, they may exist. Within the courts, they may exist. Within the prisons, they may exist. But people who are trained in this, so that when a case, the police service, the individuals who are there to ensure the security are not the ones who are burdened with this process. Somebody who actually has the training and understanding but works within the police force. The prison service, the courts, so that at short, when you have such an issue, you say, could you ask one so to come along, so that they listen to this thing, so that even as we make a decision, we have expert. It is one or two other employees within the system, but somebody with expertise. Has this process, is this something ongoing? Is this something that has been thought of? Is it something that is in the plans, in the, as we say, pipeline?
I don't think it's in the pipeline. But that would be the most ideal. And those are one of the things that we hope to do with the manual in the future, because we plan to have a lot of advocacy forums using the manual with the relevant duty bearers. And the issue of the intermediaries is a very crucial one, because the role that they play will be very crucial in the justice system in terms of communication between whether it's the court and the accused person, whether it's police and them. However, even though you have an intermediary, you still have to have maybe a family member or someone to support your decision making. Yeah.
Would you say across board that there's a fundamental understanding, or at least an acknowledgement, that this is a problem? Because then attitude, I think, in this plays a critical role for the individuals who are handling said individual, or for the system that's handling said individual. Because if we have, and there's so many things that fuel this. If we look at what you mentioned, stigma, because of cultural or traditional practices, it doesn't matter if you go into a formal setting, that we all go with our traditional cultural biases. So if I am a service officer, for example, in the police, and I have this cultural bias, or I have this stigma still in my head of somebody then who is suffering a mental illness, and that person then is brought before me for whatever reason, I probably am going to handle this person with my bias in tow. So is there and I guess that's where the question then goes, that is there an understanding across board, across those who are going to handle, it doesn't matter whether it's at the police stage, getting into court, even in hospital, even though they have the tools then to deal with these individuals, we still find that the bias exists even there. So is there a fundamental understanding or acknowledgement across board that this is a problem and that something then must be done about it? Because I see that if that is not the case, then the implementation of the elements in the manual then might be met with difficulty.
Yeah, that challenge still exists. The stigma is still there. So there's still a lot of awareness creation to be created in the community regarding of the, in order to try and change attitudes,
Yes.
the discriminatory attitudes towards these people. So it's a lot of work. Yeah, because you can imagine even when they leave prison, they're still under watchful eyes because they're ex-convicts, one, and then two, there's already the stigma around having mental health. So even one recommendation is to the probation and aftercare services.
Yes.
They need to meet the family, the community, the Nyumba Kumi, the Council of Elders. They need to sit down with them before this person is released, because you can imagine what the amount of stigma this person will face. Yeah.
But you know, the stigma, the subject is an important one. But look at the entire, let's take the Court Users Committee, okay? Within this manual that you have, do you have portions or sections where you sensitize them on stigma and issues related? The reason why I ask is, it doesn't matter what profession I'm in. The baggage I come with are my upbringing, my social conditioning, my relationships. I bring all this into that profession. Now, when it comes to mental illness, we have tons of baggage, which we all come with. And they influence the decisions that we make. So, getting people on an even keel, because if people don't have the right, in my mind, the right mindset, the right understanding of mental issues or mental health issues, then the person who has a mental health problem is already at a disservice, even before we try to give them the service that they actually need and deserve.
Yeah, I know the greater work is with the changing of attitudes, which will take a very long time. Yeah, so
it's called behavior change intervention. It doesn't have to take a long time, not necessarily. This is why you heard me mention, now I'm actually going to state it categorically, involving people who have a background in this, people who have a training in this entire process of decision making.
Behavioral scientists, like
clinical psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, most important, but there's a whole chain of people who are in this value system of mental health. Now, I am simply saying that they are an integral part and they're available. And they are more numerous than the 126 psychiatrists that we have. And they are able to assist in this process.
Yeah.
Because it can't be a seminar where people, or a workshop where people are talked to for an hour and that's it. No.
It has to be continuous.
It has to be continuous.
Yeah.
So these people have to be part and parcel of that particular system.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, a place like this, we have a clinic. The professional healthcare people there, should somebody fall ill, you're not going to rush someone to a hospital. You take them there. Why is it that an establishment like this one has an HR office? It's because if you have certain issues, you go there. Now, I'm simply saying the same thing. Prisons have hospitals. It's a question of now who you put in those hospitals. Police post offices have some sort of clinic. It's who else you put in there. The structure exists.
Yeah, the reason I was saying it may take a lot of time is because this stigma is from culture. So it's actually in the culture that people believe that such people are cursed, or so that's why I'm saying the behavioral change may take some time, and that is not something that one organization can do. If there was goodwill now from the government side,
I'm not giving you a free pass on this one. ICJ is a powerful institution. It's not you doing it. It's you finding able partners and pushing them to do what they are good at.
That's what the point was driving at, in terms of like in the past, how there were so many campaigns for HIV, TB, those things. Like, if now this could be a whole campaign in terms of changing behavioral change with regards to persons with mental illness, that's when we'll see a difference even in how they're treated, because the problem is in how they're treated, and that how they're treated is based on the prejudices that everyone has.
It's odd you should mention mental health and HIV, because one of the things, I worked in that particular space, as we call it, for a long time. And one of the things that kept puzzling people was people who worked in the community and who had been chosen to work specifically because they were good ambassadors because they themselves were HIV positive. But somebody would work for a long time. You'd find that it was noticeable. People would forget. Something they're supposed to do, they have forgotten. Now, it took research with people who understand neurology to actually determine that actually HIV did affect the mental capacity and the retention capacity of people. So somebody who had been unwell for a long time, what would happen is they would actually...
They would start forgetting for real.
Yes, for real. Meaning it's... So, and what made it worse was some of the work that they were supposed to do were actually very sensitive and they were pressured. Now, that stress itself helped exacerbate that situation. The mental condition just kept getting worse and worse and worse because of the stress-related factors.
Yeah.
And it was also found that when they were then moved to duties that were less stressful,
Lighter duties.
Right. The function fairly okay.
And also another thing is also prisoners may go in without a mental health condition, but by the time they leave, they have a mental
Or
condition.
maybe well before the time they leave. It
Even
just
just
takes maybe
going
a
through the process.
destabilization
I
of
mean,
the
you're thrown
situation.
into that system, and that's already
Yeah.
is enough stress.
Absolutely.
I guess it's just looking at again at what City is asking. So beyond publication of this manual, all right, what is ICJ doing to advance the conversation? So yes, you've done a good job. You've done the background, the research, the thoughts on what recommendations you'd like to see implemented. Are you doing anything to pursue implementation of the same?
Yes, like first we're beginning with having forums whereby we can discuss this. We can, particularly with the justice sector actors
Okay.
first, whereby we can discuss the challenges that these people face. And then also the recommendations that we have, but also it's a forum where they're also open with the challenges they face on their end. Because I remember in the forum that we had with the Kibera CUC, you find that even information sharing between them sometimes it's an issue. Because I remember the probation and aftercare services had one of the representative has stated that they give the judiciary reports, and you find that sometimes they don't read the reports properly. So even during the forums now, we get to find out the challenges that are within the system itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, because it's like getting their buy-in.
Yes.
Is there a call to action when you're meeting them? Like, beyond just saying, okay, you guys, you see, we are making sense, right? Yeah. So then what?
So then after that, we plan to also, the example I gave about the regulations, but that will be at a later date after we've sensitized. Because one thing that ICJ does is also working on policy. So at a future date, we hope that these rules on how and when intermediaries can be used, we hope that they'll be there, because that will play a big role in the access to justice for persons with mental disability.
Just going back to one of the things that you said at the very beginning of this conversation. So do we find that the majority of those who are going through the system are those with intellectual disability or those with mental disability, based on your definitions previously?
It's both.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's both. Because,
it's shared. Okay.
Yeah, because you also find persons with who abuse maybe drugs or alcohol, particularly those in the streets, tend to be petty offenders. They tend to be arrested for petty offenses. And and also ICJ has a different campaign on the decriminalization of petty offenses. Yeah.
So what kind of crimes, if I may ask, then, are those with intellectual disability then perpetrate?
So if it's one whereby a person can be violent, or I think it's schizophrenia, but I wouldn't delve into the disease because that's not my expertise.
Yes.
But I know mainly they're arrested for like indecent acts, because there's some crimes whereby a person there's some of the conditions that can lead a person to undress, or they can be violent. So they're arrested for, it's called breaching of the peace. Yeah, or sometimes just begging if they're on the streets. There's loitering. Those are the petty offences I'm talking about. These are minor offences with the imprisonment of less than 6 months or a
For
fine.
which many would argue that this act is as a result of this incapacity
Yes.
and not necessarily of choice.
Yes,
Okay.
but you see, the nature of the condition itself can make them act violent, and
Yep.
then they can be so much force used on them, which they can even be shot.
Right.
Then there's a case like this that happened in the US. He's called, sorry, I forget the name, but it was in Los Angeles, and he was shot because he had a mental condition and he became violent, and he was shot because, police can use extreme force because they may think you're resisting
Yeah, 'cause
arrest.
violence is
Was
violence.
was the
Yeah.
person black by any chance?
Yes.
There are also very many cases where somebody may end up in court. They are innocent. But in their defense, you also do not know that they have a mental illness, because many of the conversations that people will have is, because of their mental illness, they committed a crime. But also it could be you're completely innocent. It's not because of your mental illness that you are innocent. It's just because
You're innocent.
you are innocent.
I remember the case
But
of
then-
Baite in Madare.
Yes. So when you're taken to court and you're defending yourself, you're completely innocent. Do you still get the same access to justice? Because, many cases, you're looking at this is the nature of the crime that has been committed. So this person, for the time they're doing this, maybe there's something wrong. It could just be something else. Corruption, for instance. You have
So-
mental illness,
One challenge with that is
but you're innocent.
once you have a mental health condition, you lose your legal capacity. That's one challenge. The major
You
challenge.
lose your legal capacity.
Yes, that's a major challenge, and that's an error. But
So how then are you treated if you've lost your legal capacity?
Somebody else speaks on your behalf.
yeah, it's called guardianship.
Yeah.
Yes.
Across board, because even with mental disability,
The severity is different.
exactly, there are grades, there are levels. So one
Something can be
incapacity is
short-term,
different.
something
Can
can
be
be-
short term. It can be momentary. It can
Yes.
be long. So how do you then say that in a moment of you had a panic attack, you had a bout of depression, then going as far as psychosis or schizophrenia? How then do you say that you then lose your legal, what did you call
Capacity.
it? Capacity in that one moment, as opposed to the 10 years that one could have suffered from schizophrenia?
Yeah, that's once you're assessed and they find that you have a mental health condition, and that's the provision I was talking about in the Mental Health Act. The court makes an order
Yeah.
and they appoint someone to manage your property. In that's losing your legal capacity.
It's unfair.
Yeah.
They need to change.
Yeah.
These things need to change. Okay. Thank you for joining us, Santana. As you commence these conversations, as you continue holding the conversations with the various stakeholders in the justice sector, please come back and you can also bring them and let's continue this conversation. It's a very, very important conversation. Access to justice for persons with mental disability. They may be forgotten, but they shouldn't be. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.